We're into day 2 of the semi-finals in the Opera Euro Rapid online tournament. And in the last video, I showed you how Wesley so dominated the first set against Rajabov. So I want to complete that story and show you what happened in day 2 and the second set. So Wesley clearly content to play very solidly in the first 2 games. They were both drawn. Remember, he just needs a draw in the second set and he's through. So I'm going to show you game 3 of the second set. Rajabov needed to win one of the final 2 games, and here with the white pieces he obviously thought this is going to be my best shot. And so against Wesley's Nimzo Indian he played f3, and that is one of the sharpest, most ambitious lines against the Nimzo. White wants to build a big centre with e4. It's as simple as that. But, of course, playing a move like f3 entails some risk because it opens this diagonal, and, you know, I wonder how the knight on g1 is feeling about that pawn on f3. Not very happy. So you give something, you get something. d5 is a good move here for black. c5, as Wesley played, also a good move. d5. The plan is still to play e4. Castles, e4. And now Wesley goes b5. So, well, he might have had a kind of solid policy in those first 2 games, but he's fighting fire with fire here. It's a bit like a Blumenfeld counter gambit, if that means anything. Basically, you're undermining the pawn on d5. You're knocking out that pawn on c4, and then you want to try and destroy White's centre. And black is doing that while his king is safe and White's is still in the middle. It takes a long time before the bishop and knight clear out of the way for White to castle. Now, in this position, e5 is the most popular move, and that's played a lot by Mamedyarov, Rajabov's compatriot. But Raja went knight h3, which is also seen. Wesley took on c4. And now here is a trick that is so typical of this variation. Knight takes d5. It's all theory, of course, but let me just show you what happens if pawn takes knight, queen h4 check, and you win back the bishop. So after knight takes, you play bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and then queen takes d5, knight c6. So from a positional point of view, I mean, White has a nice pawn chain and has some control over d5. You know, that's quite nice. If the king were tucked in the corner, then you can try and organise, you know, to get a clamp in the position. But it's not simple with the king still in the middle, and black also has the 2 bishops. So it's a tricky position. Firuzja has played this and gone castles here, and that's probably the best move. But I think Rajabov was, you know, he spent about a minute on this move, bishop e3. I think that showed that he's maybe not completely familiar with this line. Perhaps he was expecting Wesley to play something more solid. But after bishop e3, bishop a6, well, that looks like a beautiful diagonal for the bishop. And then he played knight f4, trying to bring that knight back into the game, back into the middle. King f2 is the computer recommendation here. But knight f4 played, and now, well, I really like Wesley's next move. Queen h4 check. Now that forces a concession. Obviously, the bishop can't interpose because the knight could be taken. So really White has to flick in g3, and then the queen drops back to f6, which of course a reasonable square. But it's very nice for black that this pawn move has been induced, because f3 is just that little bit weaker, and that has quite some significance in the game. King f2 played, and bishop takes knight, and rook b8. Very simple. Well, if that rook can make it to the second rank, then the king is in massive trouble. it seems to me that there's only one side is in real danger in this position. Black's king is very snug here. White's king, wow, looks really drafty. And this is already quite unpleasant for white. If you play a simple move like rook b1, then just queen takes c3. And that's not easy for white. So rook d1 played. And I think Rajabov did this because after queen takes, then rook d2 kind of keeps things reasonably solid. But Wesley played a much stronger move, knight e5, and that is looking almost octopus-like, actually. Looking at some really sensitive squares in white's position. Bishop takes c5 played, but frankly by this stage it is really difficult. But white is now in massive trouble. Rook b2 check, rook d2, and now let me give you a big clue as to what's happening next. Yes, it's the octopus knight. Knight d3. Well, it's only a temporary octopus, if I can put it like that. If knight takes knight, then rook takes rook is winning. So basically, Raja had to give up his queen. Bishop takes and rook takes. So you can see here that, well, white has a rook and a bishop against the queen, but I suppose some drawing chances, but obviously this is a position where only two results are possible in a normal game. Either it's going to be a draw or a win for black, basically. So a very pleasant position for Wesley to find himself in. Well, let's see what happened. F5. Excellent move. That king is still in some danger. So let's crack open the F file. Also solves the back rank problem to some extent as well. Rook d2 attacks the queen, moves back, and, well, Raja wanted to keep the F file closed and did this, and connected his rooks. A6, that is a useful pawn to keep hold of. Rook takes, rook e8, black is activating, the rook comes back to defend the bishop, and now excellent move from Wesley. The big danger in these kind of positions, of course, is that the side with the rook and bishop is going to be able to construct some kind of fortress. So what you need to do is create weaknesses, and then the queen can somehow have fun. And this next move is really good. F4. Great move. So if pawn takes pawn, then the queen comes back, and now we can see that the queen is like a heat-seeking missile. Where there's a weakness, it'll find it. So that pawn can be taken. But also, having played f4, the queen is ready to dive into h3 to start attacking weaknesses, attacking the king, attacking those weak pawns. So beautiful move, f4. So that was taken with the bishop, but now the queen came in and was able to capture the pawn on a2. So now we can see that this pawn was really worth keeping. That's the basic idea. That pawn is going to try to go the whole way. So first things first, black wants to get down to the second rank, so Raja stops that. Queen b3 hits the pawn on f3. Told you that's a weakness, and let's see what happens in the end. h6, good move. Let's just keep the king absolutely secure so that now the rook really can join the fray, and then the king will be reasonably safe on h7. So Raja decides, fine, let's exchange that rook off. But somehow, that rook exchange, well, I'm not going to say that white could defend any better, but I think Wesley would probably have been very pleased to see that exchange. It makes the task somehow clearer. So the king comes to e8. Rook takes pawn. Mistake. Whoops, I overshot with the arrow. Queen b2, check, and then you pick up the rook. So the rook actually came back to d2 here. Of course, the rook would love to be able to stay on the 7th rank, but actually it's going to be forced away, and it doesn't make any odds, and then the pawn is going to go down. So let's come back here. So this is the game continuation. Rook d2 covers the 2nd rank. And now, well, simple plan. Advance the a-pawn as far as it will go. And basically, white can't do much about this. But the bishop is covering a1. Well, what happens if white just kind of hangs tough with rook e1? So that both pieces are covering the a1 square. Well, in this case, watch what happens. We can break white's fortress. Queen c2, check. Queen f5, there we go, the weakness of that pawn. And it's not just the fact that that pawn is weak. It's that the 2nd rank is exposed as well. So here, you threaten to take the pawn, check, but also take the bishop and make a queen. So that's the position a2 just played. Rook e2, and now, well, queen b5. It's the same story, actually. Attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. Rook e1 and queen takes bishop. There really wasn't a decent defense against this. Rook takes and queen and rook e4. Well, this is white's last hope. That with all the pieces, all the pawns concentrated on one side of the board, that he can construct a fortress and prevent black breaking through. Fortress? We don't believe in fortresses. No, we don't. Well, as Carlsen famously said, I don't believe in fortresses. And this one, well, watch Wesley's technique. It's pretty good. Queen b2 check. King g1. Queen d2. That's a beautiful move. And that's the first kind of minor Zugzwang, you could say. So wherever white moves is a concession, basically. So, for example, if that pawn advances, then the king will come up. Let's attack that pawn. The queen comes back, and then having forced g4, the king is going to advance into the position. So that's one problem. What about just waiting with king f1? Then queen h2, the queen is in. So basically, in this position, the rook has to move. So if it goes to e5, then queen d4 check picks up the rook. So rook f4 check. But now the king can cross over. And it means it can advance into white's territory. Again, this position is Zugzwang, basically. Rook e8, king c4, and the king gets closer in. At the moment, well, it can't cross over the e-file. So now we've got a few more little subtleties from Wesley. Queen c2 check. Now, this is quite important because basically that king would like to stay connected to the pawns. It really wants to stay with the pawns. But the problem is, watch what happens after king h3. h5, let's stop the king advancing. White can only wait. And now queen f2. This is a problem. And when the pawn advances, queen g1. And mate follows. That is the problem. So basically, after these checks here, that king has to go back to the back rank. It can't move up the board. And that makes life very, very difficult. And in this position, actually, Rajabov resigned. Queen a2 check. So, well, I think this one needs a bit of explaining. Well, once again, if the king comes up, then we've already seen that that's fatal. So, okay, why not move the king back? What's the problem? What's changed here? Well, Wesley has manoeuvred the queen to the right position and can play queen f7. So there we go. Once again, it's the weakness of that pawn on f3. It's just a little bit loose. Hits the rook, hits the pawn. Okay, well, if rook e1, then queen takes, where you can see that white's position is collapsing. That one's going to drop as well. So after queen f7, rook a8. Okay, take care. We don't want to take this because there's going to be a check on a3. So let's play queen d5. Attacking the rook. Check. And now the king comes into e2. So the king is just getting a little bit closer. So king g2. Well, for the moment, this one has been held, but the king is closer. Queen d2. Now that's a nice move. Let me see if let's try rook a1. King e3, check. And now the king has to go up. And let's put the king on f2. You could take on f3, but rook f1 checks the king away. Better to come to f2. So you can see that that king is right in the heart of the position now. Now the king cannot run away. King g4 can be met by queen d4. Check, forking king and rook there. So white waits, rook b1. Queen e2, we're getting closer. That's rather nasty. h5. So we're just restricting the king. And finally, we play king takes f3. Everything is right. Rook b3 check, king here. Let's go right to the end. And now the pawns fall, and after that, it's queen g2 mate. There we go. Finishing with the kiss of death, checkmate. We do like that. Well, I think Wesley played a perfect game there. And I have to say, he looks just so much in control on the chessboard and off it. You know, he's very calm, very cool. And of course, that win... well, he didn't even need to play game 4. It was irrelevant. Even if Rajabov hit back, it would have been 2-all. So basically, after that game, it was a shutout, and Wesley won the match. So he's through to the final, and he will face Magnus Carlsen, who got through by the skin of his teeth, having made a couple more terrible oversights in set 2. He lost set 2, but he won through in the Armageddon. So it'll be Wesley So facing Magnus Carlsen in the final. That'll take place over Saturday and Sunday. Don't miss it. I'll be reporting on those games as well. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And do consider supporting us, Patreon or PayPal. Thanks for watching.